You want me to discuss that experience with the flying saucers?
What were we talking about last night, you mean?
Yeah, a little bit. What happened exactly? If you want to know what happened. So, I ran into a little bit of a problem. Bob was here yesterday. Oh, you want to hold it, Jay? Bob was here yesterday, and he said that he brought up an interesting point. He said, you can't demonstrate the fact that ESP doesn't exist. And instead of saying it doesn't exist, why don't you just say that we don't have any evidence to support its existence, and instead of saying flatly it doesn't exist. Now, a lot of people feel that that's a very valid point. I'd like to tell you a little bit about psychological fear that I have. I have tremendous fear of metaphysics. I know a lot of you don't know this, so you don't know me that well. Now, I have a tremendous fear of that whole area. Does anybody know why?
You can't weigh it?
No, that wouldn't give me the fear.
Oh, it's a very threatening thing as far
Why
as
is it threatening?
Why is it threatening? Because, well, it could, it's not based on any type of physical representation, and it could turn into another Inquisition.
Right. In other words, once I tell you my dead grandmother comes every night, she's only visible to me, and I may have, a lot of you people are probably not aware of things like this. If you are a particular kind of technician, particular kind, your dreams are technically clear in whatever field you work on. Now, if you're metaphysical and you hardly know the difference between a ghost and St. Elmo's fire and a weeping cat and a dead child, if you have a child that died and you're very concerned and locked on, I said a Siamese cat is whacking away outside the window, you might say, Mommy, I don't know what you'll hear with your metaphysical background, and I'm very much afraid that once I turn around and say, the devil has possessed you, I feel it. The whole fucking country can go insane. And so metaphysics to me means people go off the deep end by their beliefs and inclinations with less and less verification. You know, you're a witch. I'm a witch. A warlock. The powers have been given me to heal you. And so you get all kinds of shit, all varieties of it growing in different directions. Then you get a guy called the true warlock. Another book will come out. The phony warlocks. The warlocks that are low-grade warlocks with a high-grade warlock. Like in metaphysics, you've got such terms as the lower astrals, the fourth root race. Let me give you a little metaphysical shit. Sometimes when I put my pipe down here and I go in there and get a glass of water, I come back, it's not there anymore. You ever do that? You know you put the fucking thing there. Well, the real story is this, that I'm preoccupied when I'm working on it. Jesus Christ, I gotta get a book and all that. I put it down, I don't remember that, because I'm thinking of the book. That's what happens. And I usually put my pipe there. But if I put my pipe down and say, now, Fresco, it's in the pencil rack. I never forget it. But I don't do that, because I usually say, the coffee is overflowing. I run in there and I don't know where to put it, because this is the only available surface. Since I don't look, some people are so conventional, they couldn't put a pipe anywhere but in the ashtray, because it says ashtray. They respond to the law like that. So what happens is a lot of people don't operate in disciplines a certain way. And if you get into this root race shit, I can think some lower astrals have come around to harass me. You know what I mean? Now in Hawaii, in the South Seas, they have them too. They're called the mini hoonies. They're little people. And they'll solve a problem for the natives. If they have a problem, then they'll all go away. And they say, what happened? Everything seems to be fixed. The mini hoonies did it. See? Or everything is not going well. Well, mini hoonies usually fix things. And in Ireland, it's the leprechauns. Now, I can turn around and say that goddamn fifth root race, you see what I mean? Or I put this glass of water here, I know I put it there, and I go in the other room and I come back, it's on the floor. Goddamn lower astrals. Now, if you think people die and come back to harass you, then God is criminally insane. In other words, if these people can organize and come back and say, first going to put his pipe here, if this is all they've got to do, if this is the highest form of life called man, I know that a pig doesn't come back to do that. And if man comes back to harass me and take this fucking pencil and put it there, then the shit that people believe in is so fantastic. They believe that we are the fourth root race, and that we're evolving up and up to become one with cosmic consciousness, one with the Godhead. Now, a lot of these people believe that all people are gods unto themselves in the process of evolution, and they're evolving. But they have to let go of material things, because material things interfere with the spiritual. Now, such things as lust and wanting money and power, all of that interferes with your carefree love of life. And you will find a correlation, I think you might if you come here often enough, between what I say and not all of youth, but a great deal of youth. At the university level, a lot of college kids still believe in war, in a world free of war. They'd like to see a world in which there's peace and harmony and warmth and love. Now what happens to these kids when you start talking about a world without profit and without fighting? They stand up and they do that. Once they get out into the world and get their business going and start smoking these 50-cent cigars and get a Mercedes, a Cadillac, big house in Hong Kong, a yacht, and you say, what happened to the anti-war shit? I was a kid then, you know. So what happened is we get involved in the business world and all those things are gone. That's why on a university level, not in all cases, but a certain percentage of the students will get up and say, what can we do to end pollution? The adults, we've always had pollution and you're always going to have it. And they've been beat down and shit. Because as kids, they came up with their ideals. They wanted something new, and the guy said, yeah, not in our time, and kept harassing them continuously. So people don't push anymore. You know, oh, what's the use? And what happens is they flatten you out. It's like breaking a horse in. You know, you get on the horse and he tries to knock you off, and you stay with it. Pretty soon the horse doesn't try anymore, some horses. So you've broken that horse. Most of us, when we get to be about 30 or 33, we're broken. We just don't have any fight left in us. So that's why you equate youth with the future or youthful ideas. What happens is, I try not to associate with people my age. I'm nearly 60. And if I associate with people my age, what happens is they generally run me into the ground. You know, let's go for a walk, you know. So I sometimes am walking like they do. So I try not to associate with them. Now, a lot of people don't understand. Well, look at that goddamn Fresco. You know, he goes out with people half his age, and that isn't right. They think that way. And I want to tell you something. I want to try to get this message across to you. If you, when you get to be about 70 years old, a flower is still going to look pretty to you. It's not going to look shriveled up. When you get to be 80 years old and you see a beautiful sunset, it's going to look just as beautiful. And when you meet a nice person that you like to talk to, somebody pleasant, whether they're 70 or 9 years old, you like them. And so if you're not sick, if you haven't got half your organs rotting away, you will be able to jump around and walk around, do many things. And if you read a lot, your enthusiasm and ideas will be the same. I think that using the term youth is a state of mind. It's an attitude. I really believe this. I believe that a lot of people get married, have kids, and then they act their role. If you give a student a book and say, you're now 37 years old, say the person's 16, and you're telling the children not to come in too late. Now, don't forget, children, try to get in. They do that. They read it right, as they should. And then you ask children to imitate their parents. And say, now, you've had too much ice cream already. And they know just what to do. And I think that what we do is play the fucking role. We go to a movie, and the guy's 20 years old, sits down, he reads a newspaper, and he doesn't look at his wife anymore. She never sees his face in the morning. Now, in the early days, when they're first married, you know, they hug each other, pick each other up. And then after a while, all she sees is the newspaper. And he says, you know, he's reading the sports page, and she says, you don't talk to me anymore. He says, well, what are we going to talk about? And so what happens is we keep getting off and pulling into ourselves because we find it takes too much effort to deal with another person. In the early days, youngsters deal with each other. Say, you know, what do you want to do? We'll go swimming. They both go swimming. Okay, they go to the library together. They go to a movie together. But as they get older, they tend not to do too many things together. They tend not to because they're really not that interested. I'll go shopping with my girlfriend, you know, but it's a pain in the ass to me, though. I don't like it. But after we've known each other for 7 or 8 years, I says, you going shopping? Have a nice day. Yeah. What the hell? I don't want to go out there and smell your ribbity sneed number 5. I'm not interested in that shit. He says, do you think this blouse looks better than the other one? I says, yeah. He says, but you don't like the other one? I said, no, I like this one. He said, well, I think the other one's... I don't want to get it. If you like them, take them both or leave one behind. But don't make a fucking issue of them while the world's falling apart. I don't like to go shopping. I don't give a shit whether your shoes have 9 straps or 11 straps. I really don't give a shit. Try not to put me in that situation. There's certain things I'm interested in, but don't ask me about those things. They really bother my ass. So a lot of you people here still don't understand that. And it would bother your ass if I kept bringing out unusual rocks from caverns of the world, spread them out on the floor. And this comes from Slobovia. And I told you the mining process, and you said, yeah. And after 9 rocks, I bought a barrel of them. And that's what you're doing to me when you say, don't you like those shoes with the low heels or high? I don't give a shit. And so next time I come out with a barrel of rocks, say, put them back, will you? Okay? Do that. Because we all have rocks that we carry around, and we all love our rock collection. But other people are not that interested in your fucking rock collection. So the next time you come out with a barrel of rocks, say, is anybody interested in rocks? Show of hands, please. And then carry it right back. And I would say that's maximum courtesy. Maximum courtesy, instead of pulling out your astrology sheet, say, are you interested in astrology? Pull it up. Take it away. Now, I assume that you're here tonight because you're interested in these general ideas. If you're not, I imagine you'd walk out. Another condition I allow for, if you have to take a shit, you'd walk out or leave. So there are other conditions if you don't feel good. So let me see if I can get this information across on the, at least on what happened to me in terms of the flying saucers. Because I don't think I've told this story for many, many years. I don't think, how many of you have heard it? About 3? Okay. Well, briefly, there was a guy named Frank Scully. All I can tell you about him, he was a very pleasant guy, as pleasant as a truly religious, simple Catholic can be. And he was a Catholic, religious, and very simple guy. Simple meaning sweet, nice, but no in-depth knowledge about anything. And he used to come to my lab occasionally and always marvel at what he saw, all the strange things. And he always wanted to try to introduce me to people that might be able to do things. And he died after the flying saucer shoot, so that whole thing stopped. Another interesting thing happened, you'd be interested in this, Callie. A guy that worked for the New York Times in public relations was brought down to my place, and he looked around, he said, why, shit, he says, what the hell are you doing here? You ought to be in Washington. He says, I'll have you doing top planning in this country in 1 year, or I'll cease to exist. That's what he said. And he worked his ass off for 3 months and got letters very interested, and we're thinking about it, all that shit, you know. And he killed himself in a year. The guy picked up the phone, said, Fresco, this guy killed himself. Because he knew he can get this thing on the road. And I tried to tell him that it sounds clear and logical to you, but out there, it isn't that clear or that logical. All right, with the Scully was going to do a book on flying saucers, and he said to me, how can 5,000 people in New Mexico see something go over and it amount to nothing? And he says, and then you get reports coming in from all over. Can all of that mean nothing? Can you say that, let's say that there's 80,000 sightings in the past 10 years. Are not 2 or 9 of them authentic? He said that, I can't help but believe there must be some saucer activity. And he went on to tell me about the pilots and their experience and all sorts of shit. And he asked me what I thought of flying saucers. I said, I think they're good aerodynamically. I think it's an excellent form, and a very excellent form for extraterrestrial flights, propelled a different way. I like the shape, and I've always been interested. And he got in touch with me because in 1931, I flew a flying saucer, about 3 feet in diameter. I've always been interested in flying saucers. And I've made a lot of models of different types of saucer aircraft. Very slick-looking things that look like a knife blade, like this type of saucer. This is the blister. And there was a bunch of blades built in the saucer, like Venetian blinds. It's mechanical. And they'd open and take air in. And once you went forward, they'd change their pitch. And exhaust gases came out of a special surface, a slot that could remain continuously open on a portion of the rotor system. Okay, it was a very successful kind of flight, very efficient, very lightweight. And he read about that, and he said, hey, you're the guy that actually built a saucer in 1931, before flying saucers were known. When I worked for Douglas Aircraft, I drew flying saucers for them in structure and a new type of aircraft, tried to interest them. This is a very long time ago, before the war, World War II, about 5 years before, 6 years before the war. And they weren't interested in anything that radical. So Scully got in touch with me. He said, well, since you're the only guy I can talk to about it, I would like you to investigate these people that have seen the flying saucers. And he brought them all to his home. and the publishers were there, and he was working on his book. And he had girls there doing shorthand and taking reports of what these people had actually or said they have seen. And a lot of people get up and say, I was going down the street one night and I saw these lights changing color and all that. But there was no description of anything, just a blue light in the sky, pulsing light turning green, or 5 lights moving along, or a cigar-shaped object, vague, sometimes with portholes, and sometimes an elliptical object, but never, rivets or windows, really that kind of description, until he introduced me to a guy called Dr. G. Now, Dr. G is in his book. He talks about Dr. G a lot. He's supposed to be a physicist at one of the universities who works for the federal government. He couldn't give his name because the government wants to keep that secret. So he calls himself Dr. G. And very nice guy. And he told me that he had taken the saucer apart and brought it to right field. Not he was in charge of that project. And he was about, I'd say 60 years old, looked a lot like Norbert Wiener, kind of chubby, a beard, and looked like a college professor. And the language was fairly appropriate. And he told me he took it apart. But first he told me, when it first landed, he and a whole staff of military men roped off the area and they hung up canvas walls and monitored the whole thing so no one would get near it. All of that's all right. Then he said they went over the thing and they couldn't, they tried to drill a hole in the surface and they couldn't. They used diamond drills, welding, torches, everything, and they couldn't do it. And there was no way of getting at it. Then what looked like the glass, they tried to bang and whack and scrape. They used a diamond tool. They couldn't scratch the surface. A lot of descriptions like that. Until he found some key point on it, which he didn't tell me more about it, but he made adjustments with that key point, and the whole thing fit together. He said, like a dovetail jigsaw puzzle. Dovetail is this. You've seen things, wooden forms that fit together. This is one surface and the other surface interlocks. That's called a dovetail fit. You press it. He said it had a kind of a dovetail interlocking system. When you touch the key point, the whole thing came apart neatly. Okay. Now, I asked him how the dovetail maintained one plane. That is, it couldn't be pulled apart, but it could move up and down. So what locked the dovetail in position? He said, he says, I'm not permitted to reveal that. But he was revealing enough to whet your appetite. And he wasn't even permitted to reveal that. So if he was doing any revealing, he was acting as an enemy of America, since he was employed by the federal government special investigator for unidentified flying object. He's not even supposed to tell us about anything.
Jacque, this Dr. G is telling you this
He's
story?
telling me that. Me and 40 other people. Okay?
That he
At Frank's County. He took it apart and delivered it to right field.
A real flying saucer?
That's what he said.
Okay.
Then he said, now we're still trying at right field to affect the surface, and we can't. He said, I said, do you have any part of that machine? He says, yes. I says, is it possible to bring it here? Or to my lab, but I prefer you bring it here at the 40 people, because I didn't want to get into a personal thing. That's a question I asked him. He said, why, yes, I have it out in the car. Now, also, you know who was there? Father Dunn and Father Dempsey, the Catholic priests that I told you that I knew at one time, do you remember? They were there, and they loved this meeting, because they loved to see me in that kind of situation. So what is he going to do now with this flying saucer shed all around him? So this Dr. G says, yes, I have it in the car. And this Father Dempsey was fat, very comfortable. And he didn't smoke a cigar, but he said, that's nothing interesting. So he brings in this stuff wrapped up, and I think I told some of you, it looked like lucite, and it felt like lucite. And I said, this is a material that you can't bend, drill, shape, or anything. He says, that's right. And actually, the sheet was about this size. And it was about that thick, like a 1/4 inch thick, and about maybe 11 inches long, and about 3 inches wide. So I asked Mrs. Scully if I can heat up the oven. She said yes, and I tied it in a knot. And I gave it back to Dr. G. And he said, that's funny. I must have given you the wrong material. He may have. That's entirely possible. So I said, okay, but he would really know that it was lucite, because it wouldn't be like the other material. But all he has to do is come in and say he's a professor and this is a strange material, and that's all I'm allowed to tell you, see, and walk out with it. But he did permit me to do that, and I handed it first to the Catholic priest, Father Dempsey, then I handed it to Father Dunn. And they're looking at each other, and he said, he may have given this wrong piece. I said, yes, he may. He might have done that. Because why should he lie? I said, that's right, why should he? So I gave him the thing, and he said next week he would bring the real material back, and he'd also bring one of the main drive components, a mechanical piece from the ship. Well, he brought a gadget in that looked something like this. It's a very precision machine. It's a 3/4 rear view of a gear unit. He didn't have these gears. He just brought this in. He said, this is one of the mechanical drive units. And I went home. I said, excuse me for about an hour, and I went back to my lab, and I brought back a catalog, Hamilton Standard propeller parts. And it even had the Army serial number on here. Okay? And I said, I'm sorry, Dr. G, but this is part of a Hamilton Standard propeller, and I opened the catalog.
So they use our numbers on this? Air numbers?
Oh.
From there into space?
And could they? Yeah, they could. But the goddamn thing, the thing was the same as the it had nothing to do with the spaceship. Okay. Then there was another, Dr. G put the thing back in his briefcase and looked at everybody and walked out. Okay? That's all I ever saw Dr. G. Now the next guy was an engineer, aeronautical engineer. He was inside the ship. He landed, he went in, and he looked around, and very good at delivery. And I said to this guy also, what's the flight principle? You know, what were the seats like? And they weren't too far from the aircraft type seats, you know, at that time. A little above that level, with safety belts and all that type of shit. There were instrument panels, which are wrong. Once you travel light years through space, you don't have instrument panels. You know, all that. Like in 2001, you're out journeying into space and you got all these instruments flicking away. You won't see all that. All you see is the conclusions. Because all that will be automatic fed in. So the future doesn't have 10 million dials moving. I'm talking about the next 75 years. You know, you don't have, like a pilot's cockpit, have no dials at all. There's nobody to be flying. So you don't have instruments. You don't have a safety belt, a big fat seat, and soft. You know, you don't have that type. That's now and the next 10 years or 15 years, but not 75 years in the future. So he said it had an unusual power plant, this gun. He said it was an electromagnetic induction drive. And I said, well, show me what the power plant looked like. And he said, well, it was covered. I really couldn't see what it looked like. I said, how did you know it was an electromagnetic induction drive? He said, what else could it be? Well, that's all right, too. Well, that's no, that really is, you infer that, you know what I mean? Obviously, if people travel through space, I might say they must have some means of suspended animation if they can travel 300 million light years. They must have some way of handling waste, or else they must have a way of turning themselves off. So I asked them a lot of questions about it. The questions did not fit. They did not fit the sophistication of the journey in the ship. Then I asked them, when they went in, was the door hinged? What type of hinge? Was it like a bank door, vault door, with steel prongs that come in and lock? Did the door split? Was it like a camera iris that opened up? I gave them a lot of ideas. What kind of door, and how did they hinge it? Far out. It was just a big fucking aircraft hinge type thing. You know, and they couldn't even do a better job than that. Okay? And so I said, okay, now I'm very much interested in another thing. The windows on the spaceship. You told me there were several portholes around there. Could you see how the glass was set in the frame? You know, was there a retainer ring with 17 screws? Was it a ring that spiraled in and locked? How was the glass held, and what was the sealant like? You know, because I'm interested. He said, well, he went on, since he was an engineer, he made a retainer ring. He says, it looked like neoprene here, and there was a new type of screw that looked elongated here, around here. Hell, that wasn't any good, because we know the future will have transparent steel. You won't have to have windows set in. The steel will be transparent where you want it transparent. And you don't have all these different materials. I'm sure, I mean, when you travel 100 million light years, when you've reached that level of intellect, You don't have a seat with a safety belt. You know what I'm talking about? It's like a baboon flying a rocket ship. It doesn't make sense. So, and then also, what did these people talk about? Well, they wanted to know our culture, and they wanted to know, what we thought, and they wanted to know Milton, the poet, more about him. This told you a little bit about the guy's interest. He was literary, and the things that they talked about were awful. Until I ran into this other guy, this engineer, it became very normal things, not too far from Buck Rogers. So I can say that his description of going in a flying saucer and description of the interior did not fare with what I think the future would be like. Now, could there be a flying saucer with safety belts and like that? Yes, it's possible, but I would not think it's possible from my kind of experience that it travel light years in space, like he said. Now, the other guy, Orfeo Guglielmo or Guglielacci or something like that, he was walking down Riverside Drive, is what Frank Scully told me. And a crystal, like a huge crystal, shaped something like this, according to Orfeo, landed quietly right down, and a door opened. That's Orfeo, welcome. And he stepped in. He was a little Italian guy. He stepped in the thing, and says, before he knew it, he could see the earth going, whoosh, and he traveled all through space in 20 minutes. They took him on a tour. And he was on NBC in California. See? So what they decided to do, they called me through the book, The Flying Saucers, to interview Orfeo on TV. And Orfeo was telling us about the space voyage and all that shit. And on the end of his description, he gave no interior description of the crystalline structure. He gave no technical description, because he's not a technician, he's just a guest. These are little green people. You know what I mean? And, I think some of you know about the monkeys that were shaved. Do you know that?
What?
Some idiots killed some monkeys and shaved them and put them near a burnt-out area where they had a circular burnout area.
That was in
And
France, wasn't it?
Here too.
Oh, here
They
too?
shaved the
That's what
monkeys,
happened in
and
France.
they took them to right field. This is true. They did. They didn't get that far because they knew they were monkeys right away. Did you ever see pictures of the shaved monkeys? They look pretty good. Monkeys do look like humans, but you had to practically break the pelvic structure to straighten out the legs, But they do look pretty good. Well, anyway, after Orfeo got through speaking, I said to him, could all of this have been a hallucination? He says, it could have been, but it was sure clear. I said, thank you, that's all. And that was the end of that interview. Then the two pilots that were flying a DC-3 over the Himalayas, they said they stopped in midair. I told you about this. The plane stopped in midair and just remained there for a while. And then I told you that in New York City I saw a little plane in one place for 15 minutes. It was a headwind equal to the flight speed of this plane. I think it was about 140 miles an hour. And it was just standing there, and the police and everyone were looking out, because they didn't think he'd run out of fuel soon. Then it began to go forward slowly. Now, I said, could it have been a head? Oh, he said, first they saw strange lights around the airplane. Strange lights. Was it blue? Was it red? Was it green? Was it violet? Was it pulsing? Was it elongated? Was it round? Was it multiple? Oh, he said, well, it was just a kind of a blue light, like my mother would describe. And these are two technicians, sort of. And technicians don't talk about that, usually. Right, so, anyway, they described that light, and then they says, it looked metallic out there, and I couldn't exactly tell you more about it. Well, what happened is there's a book that deals with unusual phenomena I mentioned from Marion yesterday called The Atmosphere. But there are other books that deal with unusual phenomena in the sky by the Civil Aeronautics Board. You can get some very interesting information, such as airplanes, which I described to some of you yesterday, flying through the air, and there's a mirror image here of a half an airplane. When you look out the window, you can see just a wing alone. Not your own wing, another wing. Just a wing. And sometimes with the right lighting, you get a mirror image of the fuselage. Sometimes you get a mirror image in front of you of your own airplane. That is the nose moving along with you. It's very rare, but it does occur. I'll tell you how it occurs and what it's based on. You get a mirror image of a person. If the person is standing near a puddle of water here, you get a mirror inverted image of that person. in the water. Now, if it's kind of foggy here, if the person wearing light clothing and the weather is misty and the sun's out, but the water is dark, due to the fact there's some black, dark clouds up there, you will see the guy in the water stronger than you will see the guy here if he's wearing a light suit and the horizon is light. But if there's a black building behind him, that's different. All right, now what have you got here? You see a man walking toward you upside down. Is that clear? That happens on the highway a lot, where you get the illusion where you know goddamn well it's water this time. And you drive up and it's just because it looks absolutely wet. But if there's an automobile here coming at you on that highway, and it's desert type country, and the highway is white and hot and the evaporation is occurring here, moisture, heat waves rising, and the horizon is light and the car is light, and it's on asphalt with heat wave on, you'll get a stronger reflection of an inverted car than you will in this image here, than the real image. So you'll see an inverted car, and you can't always tell that it's a reflection, because you can't see the border lines of the highway. You also get an inverted image of a mountain, and I mentioned yesterday, they're called islands in the sky. And if you write to Scientific American or Science Digest, they did an article called Islands in the Sky. And it's about the Florida Keys under certain conditions. Represents a simplified drawing of one of the keys. When the sky is very white and the waters around Key West is light, very light, the horizon line would be here ordinarily. But when the sky and the waters are very light, the horizon line disappears. And you get a slight wave here, and this is inferred as the horizon. The islands look like they're floating in the sky due to the evaporation, which creates an additional haze in front of the island. And there's also books called Ships That Rode the Sky. I'm talking about real ships. And there are many tales in ancient mariner journals about ghost ships that sail the sky. Have you ever read anything like that? You see them up in the sky, and that's the same thing. The ship is out on the horizon disappears due to the milkiness of the water in the sky. And when you go to Key West next time, look off to some of those islands. If you're out there in a lot of different kinds of weather, and you'll see them looking like they're floating about 10 feet off the water, way out.
Jacque, last fall I read about some steel ball that was found that was just strange. What was that all about?
Well, let me get to that. Now, you also pick up an inverted image of the ship. If the waters are slightly turbulent, there's some black clouds. I better explain what black clouds mean. Here's a photograph. Or here's a photograph of a horizon situation. These are waves in the ocean. This is a perspective plane. The waves of the foreground are always larger than the waves of the background as they go back into the picture. So here are some large waves of the foreground. And as we go back into the picture, the wave detail becomes refined. Finer. And until we get to the horizon, there's no wave detail. Now, if you've got a black cloud over here, or a dark cloud, and then you've got some white billowy clouds here and some other darker clouds here, the waves and the general patterns around it are related to what's above them. In other words, if you just show me a picture of the ocean, I can tell you the kind of sky that was out, whether it's billowy clouds or gray, because the waves are just waves without variations in tone across the plane. So the waves themselves, the product called the wave system, has shading in it. It has to do with the kind of clouds that are in the foreground and background. Okay. So if you've got a dark cloud in the foreground and you got the ship in the background, in the white milked out area, and the water is dark here due to the cloud, and the reflection of the ship is intensely white, upside down, this ship fades away, and you see a ghost ship traveling upside down in the water, or a train riding upside down on tracks. All of these things happen. Airplanes fly upside down. There are mirror images above or below. That happens, those of you that live in Florida that have traveled to Tampa sometimes, early in the morning, these are kind of simplified drawing of cabbage palms between here and Tampa. A lot of this type of palm. And if you get there, say about 6, 7 in the morning in the summer or the winter, preferably in the winter or fall, you'll see strata of moisture vapor cutting through these trees. Did you ever see that sight yet? Morning strata. Now you see it in Frankenstein pictures a lot. The guy is always walking through this dew, morning fog. Have you ever seen it? Well, the strata cuts through the plants, and sometimes it's very straight, very long. And if the sun comes up, you can see a reflection in the strata of the trees. Now that's very unusual phenomena. That's where you see half an animal run through the field. if the head is above the strata, it's called the body of the ghost deer. See? And you never see the legs. All you see is a body moving along the horns. So there's a lot of strange things that occur, but they're certainly not strange. This kind of phenomenon is described in many books. Now you go back to that strange ball. We don't know what the hell that could be. Now that was sent to a university, and the metallurgist said he's never seen metal like that. Do you remember? Did you read all that?
And there's a new issue called UFOs today, and it deals with an article dealing with that ball.
The metallurgist?
Yeah, and how they found it, and electromagnetic domains on it. It may be a tripolar type magnetic field, so they're saying.
Yeah.
And this is an unknown phenomenon in the area of physics today.
If they found such a ball, I'm just giving you now my opinion, okay? Because I really don't know. If they found such a ball that was of a metal unknown to any metallurgist, and if its magnetic domains were unfamiliar to that of any physicist, every fucking university in the country, every physicist would hop out of bed and say, I must see it. Do you understand that? Or is that not clear? Every aerodynamicist, every institute of metallurgical science would be pounding at the door. Let me see it. Because they don't say, well, I found a ball, and it's in a journal called Mail Magazine. It's a strange ball they found in the Weehawken Valley. See? Now, this is shit. Because it's not possible to find something and do that kind of article and have a metallurgist as light as I was, and then go to bed that night. You don't do things like that. Because this would cause a lot of telephone calls, the FBI, the CIA, bring people. Immediately the Air Force would send special people out there, and if there were any such metal in existence, the Scientific American would have articles day after day on this strange thing. That's why, if any man ever levitated, like Hewitt Carrington tells me he saw, he said when he was in England, he saw a guy lying on the couch, float up, go out his own window. That's right. And come back in through the open fire escape. He says, and he did not lie to me, as far as I knew. He was a very honorable guy. And whatever he told me, I'm sure he saw, but I'm sure the way he explained it is not the way it occurred. All right? Now, he wrote the book, Projection of the Astral Body. If you don't know what that means, it means that some people claim, or thousands of people claim, that they will lie down, they go through a special type of process which they breathe very deeply, and over a long period of time, first they relax from the toes all the way up, and they concentrate on this part of the forehead while they breathe, and pretty soon their own body stands up, and you can get off the bed and see yourself lying down. You know? And a lot of people describe this before death, that they stand back on the bed and they can see themselves, all the doctors bullshitting, you know, it's only got 20 minutes to go, you know, and they can pick all that up. I'm sure you must have read that. That article is standing, it appears many places. How I went to the gates of heaven. I'll tell you, the Enquirer is loaded with that shit. And this woman, the recent one I read a lot of that shit. I know you don't read. She said the streets were paved with gold. She said that with a straight face in the article. I was wondering whether it was 14 karat or 10 karat. You know, this is a strictly low-grade Earth system transfer. You know, it's like Jesus saying, you know, takes out a watch and guy says, is it real gold? I don't know, I got it around. Is it real gold? This kind of shit related to heaven. And the gates. It was really a fucking gate like that, she said. That type of
Lots
gate.
of diamonds?
Hmm?
Lots of diamonds on it?
I don't know, the diamonds, but they weren't imitations, I can tell you that. And, you know, they never talk about the continuation of the gate infinite in both directions. The fence will be infinite in both directions. And since it's a cloudy area, can you go under the gate or over it? Is it on terra firma? You know, but they don't describe those things. And, you know, God doesn't need a gate. I think he's evolved the force field about 20 million years ago. God is an easy man to make a force field. You're walking on heaven and clunk! Right then, you put your hands in, bang, 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 nothing happens. He doesn't need a fucking gate with a guy standing there, St. Peter, you know, what are you here for? You know, this kind of shit is so low grade. Whenever I read the Bible, I really have to I have to take a leak before you, otherwise I piss in my pants. It's so nonsensical. It's like going to another planet where there are a zillion years ahead of us, and a guy's going to take you into their secret room, and he takes out a big fucking ring with a lot of old skeleton keys. and he puts it in a lock, rusty lock. And this doesn't make sense. And that's the way, when they wrote about heaven, they had gates and shit like that. And now they don't even talk about elevators in heaven. And they still talk about the angels having wings. You know, they're drawn all over the ceilings, you know. And yet you know that some of these men in our army today, they wear a little sack on their back. They don't need to flap away like man. And the sack, they take off. There are these little platforms people stand on, you know. Have you seen them? And they lean to the right, it goes to the right or left. Flying platforms, they look like this. Some of you may have seen it. It's got a little fence around, and the guy stands on there, there's a propeller blade turning in there. It goes about 100 feet. All right. Now, what the hell's the angel of this wings, you know, beating like mad? Do you have air up there in heaven? Do you have feathers on your wings? You know, it's such a terrible story. So whenever people ask me whether I believe in God, they've told me about that God, kind of God, and that kind of God is fake and shit. You know, if you ask if a monkey could speak, he'd draw a picture of the God, and it looked like this, probably. What else kind of God can he have? So the whole idea becomes unacceptable, and metaphysics goes into realms that are not fascinating. They're not even interesting because the levels of what they go into is not decipherable in some instances. Now, there's a guy called Frank Edwards. Does anybody know him? He's a very dangerous man. He writes sensational books. He takes a little bit of information and elaborates like that on it. He's such a fucking fraud. And he wrote The Moving Coffins of Barbados. You know about that shit? A lot of that shit he writes about. And in Barbados there's a cave, see? And this happens all over the island. And they got 7 coffins lined up there. And they got a gate here. And you come back in 8 or 9 months or a year, and the coffin that's here is over there, and this coffin is over there. And they're all turned around in different positions. And they straighten them all out again. And they lock the gate. And you come back, and they're all over. Frank Edwards. It's called The Mysteries. Do you remember the name?
Yeah, he wrote Stranger Than Fact.
Right, Stranger Than that type of shit. And now, in Barbados, there's a lot of earthquakes. Like in Los Angeles, a lot of tremors continuously. And it's pretty hard to keep anything in one place. So the coffins go bouncing around. This is not unusual, but so do soup bowls, and so do barrels and stores and furniture move around in Barbados. And a lot of those islands are in the earthquake zone. And you get, in Hawaii, you get a lot of tremors. I remember living continuously. I'd have to straighten my books out in Los Angeles after a tremor. So the moving coffins of Barbados, the way Frank Edwards describes it, he says nobody knows anything about it, all that type of shit. And another thing I want to brush through tonight, if we got the time, we got about 5 minutes or so, is the Devil's Triangle. Briefly. There's a place called Cape Hatteras, I think it's all about South Carolina or North Carolina. North Carolina. The waters are very rough out there. And all kinds of ships go down there because the conditions there are very turbulent. Now, when you go down off the coast of Florida, go way down here toward Puerto Rico, you have the warm waters, cold air meeting. You've got all kinds of currents. You may not know this. In some of the stratocumulus clouds, there are air currents that move at 300 miles an hour down. Did you know that? This is rare. Sometimes 150 miles an hour. Sometimes an upshoot in the clouds of 100 miles an hour. And that's why they avoid going in those tremendous clouds that pile up. And you ever see them when you're flying? You see gigantic clouds? You go into those clouds sometimes and really shake you to pieces, tear your plane to pieces. So when you get down in around Puerto Rico, there's a lot of those clouds, a lot of currents. And usually, airplanes are welded or made of aluminum. And when they hit the water at full speed, they usually sink. And when you consider the sea, when you consider several hundred miles at sea and take a little boat, with all the coral heads that stick up, out here even in the West Indies, they'll rip the bottom of your boat open in no time. So there are areas of the earth, no question about it, where there's turbulences, down sprouts, upward currents of air, where more planes are lost than any other place. And they even tell stories about animals being lost on the desert, or tribes that went out there and never heard from again. I mean, it's a big area. But deserts have sandstorms. It's pretty hard to... They said there was a little village once in that desert 20 years ago. They never could even find the village anymore. Well, those goddamn sandstorms, they build mountains like 100 feet over things. and sand covers things very quickly. So at sea, on the bottom of the sea, a plane that's missing several years, there are all kinds of barnacles and fish living in it. It doesn't have a clear outline. There's green seaweed. It depends on where the plane goes down. So there are definite areas, like Cape Hatteras, there's a lot of shipwrecks. And there used to be, I think, off Haiti. Remember the story, what's his name, the guy who used to wreck ships off Haiti? And had the most dangerous game. Does anybody know that story? Well, this guy had a little area off Haiti, and he had a warning light system here, and there's some dangerous rocks here, and he always turned the warning light off and moved it, so ships would hit and sink. And if any survivors got ashore, he'd invite them into his castle, feed them well. No.
Play hunter and hunter.
Yeah, he'd hunt them. He'd give them a knife, and they'd run off into the jungle, and he'd hunt them. He's called man the most dangerous game. It's very easy to hunt a lion, you know, they have no cunning. But man with a knife is pretty good, so he gave him 15 minutes to eat or a half hour, and then he went out after. In his trophy room, he had human heads hanging up there. You know what I mean? It's an interesting book in the sense that it puts man in that same position. And the interesting thing about it is that the character in the book is an interesting guy, because he raised a lot of questions about, you know, that have human heads hanging there. But we don't react that way. When I go to a friend's house and he's got a deer hanging there, a baby deer's head hanging up there, we don't react that way. Oh, what a wonderful collection. It should be shocking. Now, I just want to say this. If a man ever at any time demonstrated ESP once to any scientist, that scientist would have no peace of mind the rest of his life. He would be out there advocating the methods of finding it. There are even courses you can take in developing your psychic abilities. And I think you do much better if you try to read people, practice reading people and body language and subliminal communication, which I think you do much better at. And a lot of metaphysics is based on a lot of things that are not fully comprehended. But rather than give it a metaphysical assumption, it'd be much wiser for us to study these things and try to understand them. Okay, I think we have just about that time. So where is this place? Anybody want the address?
Is it the